again, everybody, and welcome to another 80s golden age of comedy. I'm your host, Bruce Starr, and the way this whole thing came about was my friend Mitch put me on the doorstep of the Improv on Melrose in Hollywood in 81 after I drove across country from Boston to find a place for myself in the world of show business. And that's where I stayed for the next several years. And I got to know a lot of the stand-up comedians that are now household words. We just sat around and nobody was famous yet. And then Evening at the Improv hit, and that made a huge difference. Comedy clubs were springing up all over the country after seeing Evening at the Improv on television. And that gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. And that opportunity was the big-time agents didn't have the least bit of interest in making calls for their clients who they were trying to get on television and movies. And the comedians didn't want to make the calls to the comedy clubs themselves. So I saw that as a great opportunity, actually at the urging of my roommate, Barry Martyr, for 3 or 4 years. He said, why don't you go and book these comedians? They can't do it themselves. They don't want to do it themselves. And the big agents don't want to do it. Why don't you do it? I said, no, I don't want to be an agent. I came out to show business to be a personal manager. I don't want to be an agent. Everybody hates their agent. Well, he talked me into it. And it's the best thing, it's the best story that I've got to tell in my life because I got to be friends and represent over 35 stand-up comedians. So after representing those guys, it's now 40 years later. And I've gotten together with them over the internet, and we're having a great time here on the 80s golden age of comedy. Everybody should be visiting the 80sgoldenageofcomedy.com website. We're going to be organizing and planning 80s Golden Age of Comedy tours around the country. So if you want to win free tickets or if you want to meet the comedians that come to your town, go to that website and leave me your email address and name, and we'll put you on the list so that when these great comics come to town, you will be the first ones to know and hopefully meet them when they do visit you. Now, today's guest is something quite different. I didn't know this gentleman in the 80s, but I've gotten to know him recently because he's just a very talented guy. He has forged his way into this business for many years now, and he is showing his talent in one-man shows. I'm going to let him tell you about it. I'd like to introduce Peter Fogel. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here on a Saturday morning. Nothing gives me more joy than waking up 8 o'clock to shower, take out the dog, and do this virtual interview.
Exactly. We both had to do the same thing, so I don't feel so bad. You actually saw me shaving.
Yes, I saw you shaving. That's something I can't get out of my mind.
And just so you know, even though I didn't have a top on yet, I did have a bottom when we first connected. So which
is surprising because I'm having a top now and I'm not wearing any pants. So it all evens out.
That's the amazing thing about this Zoom.
Right.
You know what's going on from here on and nothing from down below. But
right.
This is a family show and we're going to keep this clean.
You knew every comic in the 80s except me, and I used to be at the Melrose Improv. I came out to LA in 86.
You know what? I might have just missed you.
You missed me. Yeah, we were passing each other.
So I want to know about you because just like all the comedians that I represented, I knew absolutely nothing about their personal lives. And what this show enabled me to do was to go into their lives, go into their personal lives, go into their inner struggles, because the last thing they're going to discuss with me in the 80s when they want me to book them and they want to be seen as so successful, they don't want to talk about the struggle. They don't want to talk about what it took for them to get there. And this show is uncovering all of those things. So first, tell me where you were born, where you were brought up, and did your family have anything at all to do to influence you to get into this crazy business?
Being this is a family show, I'll begin, then I'll go into the story. If you're parents and you have young children, I request that you nurture, love them, be proactive in their life, supportive, because if you don't, they'll grow up to be a comedian. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was the third child, the middle child of a very dysfunctional family. And I tell people this, at 10 years old, I realized I had to get away from these people. My family, by the way.
Wow.
I had this very dysfunctional family. My father, I would say, was a malignant narcissist. And it was always about him. It was always about him. Every important, if you want to know the truth, every important part of our childhood. I have two older siblings and a younger sibling. If you know anything about malignant narcissists or narcissists in general, depending on the degrees, it's always about them. Every important part of our childhood, whether it was a bar mitzvah, a wedding, college graduation, high school graduation, high school play, he'd always pick a fight with my mother because I was getting attention and he wasn't, which is one of the characteristics of a narcissist. So it's the typical, third middle child, my older brother and sister out of the house. Then my mother's bringing up my brother and I. And it was a very difficult time because of my bombastic father. I had a lisp. I used to get migraines. I used to break out with hives constantly because that was the environment I grew up in. You hate to say it, but one of the happiest times of your childhood is when your mother would say, your father's not coming home tonight, which meant, hey, stress-free, we're going to the diner. That was our vacation. We're going to the diner without daddy because there'd be no yelling, no screaming, no throwing of things. And basically, to get attention as a child growing up, I would do impressions of Jimmy Cagney, of the Kennedys, all the standard issues, Sammy Davis Jr. I would do impressions and voices just to get attention, and that was my way of coping. I remember I used to go to an allergist as a child, breaking out with hives constantly. He'd give me needles in my arm to figure out what I was allergic to. And apparently I was allergic to every food on the planet, which my mother wouldn't serve me anymore, but I still broke out with hives. Went away to college, an acting conservatory called SUNY at Purchase. Hives went away. 24 hours. Came back from Christmas vacation. Hives came back. I said to my mother, can we go to a different allergist? We go to a different allergist, and this is absolutely true. He says, Mrs. Fogle, can I talk to your son privately for a few minutes? My mother says, well, you have anything to say to my son, you could say it to me. She goes, Mr. Fogel, Mrs. Fogle, please just wait out in the waiting room. He leans into me just like I'm leaning into the camera. He goes, son, you want your hives to go away? I go, yeah, go back to college. And that's what I did. And I barely went home on weekends or holidays, and my hives went away. Never had hives ever again. So the moral of the story was I was allergic to my family. That was basically it. Some kids do drugs. Some kids drink heavily. I went to comedy because I knew comedy, Bruce, was my way out of my life, or I would have to end up like a lot of my friends going to law school. So.
Wow. So you got out of the house, you went to college. Did you perform in college? Mostly
yes,
everybody.
I actually went to an acting conservatory called State University of New York at Purchase. While in high school, I auditioned. I was the fifth graduating class of SUNY at Purchase. This was the alternative to Juilliard. I wanted to be an actor as well as a comedian. Actor, comedian like Billy Crystal, whatever. And I was on the waiting list. I auditioned. I was on the waiting list. And my friend at the time who directed me in high school was notorious big-time producer today, Scott Rudin, Academy Award winner, Tony and Grammy Award winner.
Wow.
The only man to win the Emmy, Grammy, Tony, and an Oscar in his career. He directed me in a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum in high school. He went on to reprise that role with Nathan Lane. And if you look up Scott Rudin, he has quite an illustrious career. No Country for Old Men. I mean, he's done it all. And then when he heard that I auditioned for Purchase, I was on the waiting list, he wrote a lovely letter, and I'll actually send it to you. It was the only nicest thing I think he's done for anybody, because Scott at that point was casting on Broadway. He left high school a year earlier. He was casting on Broadway. He was Neil Simon's Gopher. So he was moving up as a 17-year-old. He was making his way in the business.
Wow.
He wrote this lovely letter saying, I directed Peter in a show. He'd be an asset to the State University of New York acting program. And I got in and I studied. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in acting. Other classmates, you will not believe this, were the great Stanley Tucci, Oscar nominee. Melissa Leo, I'm a little older than her. She wasn't there. I had gone already. Ving Rhames from Mission Impossible, I used to have lunch with. So I went on to, I was in, as you say, I was in good company with people that went on to major things. And here I am today doing a virtual podcast with you.
Watch it now.
Watch it. Be careful. And then, so it was exciting. I learned how to act, and I used my stand-up comedy and my acting skills, and I did voiceovers. And of course, we did Evening at the Improv back in the 80s, and so all the other shows.
Tell me about that step out of college, and you said to yourself, I want to do this. I have to do this.
Well, I was a big fan of, there's a book called Something Wonderful Right Away. It was written by a guy named Jeffrey Sweet, who did a chronicle of the Second City. If you know what the Second City in Chicago is, it was the improvisational launching pad for John Belushi, Jim Belushi, all the biggies. Dan Aykroyd did the Canadian. Have you heard of the Second City? So I wrote a letter to the artistic director and go, wow, I'll do anything to come and work with you in the Second City. So he got my phone number and he called up my house, and his name was Del Close. He's a legend in improvisational comedy theater and Chicago theater. And he called up and he said, is Mr. Fogel there? And my father got on the phone and he was talking. He goes, no, you want my son, Peter. So I called him from Chicago. I was about 3 weeks away from graduating Purchase. And he says, you want to train with me? Come on out. So I wasn't going to be in the Second City, but I trained with him in improvisational comedy and theater at the Chicago's Second City at 22 years old, 21, almost 22. And I learned improv, but you should look up Del Close. He's an authority. He's like the grand poobah of improvisational comedy. And I took my acting, and I was doing stand-up back then, and I was doing improvisational theater. So it was an exciting time. You know, when you're 21 years old, you think you're going to take off immediately. But of course, that's not the way the business is. That was actually the beginning of the comedy boom of the 80s. Little clubs were sprouting like weeds all across the Midwest, New York, Chicago, everywhere. That was the beginning of the comedy boom, 79, 80. Actually, I was doing stand-up comedy in high school back in Long Island, and that's where Eddie Murphy started. So we had a few big comics come out of Long Island, and right. Eddie was one of them.
So how'd you get your first, 7-8 minutes?
There's when you're a young guy and you make your friends laugh, you think you can make everyone laugh. But when you try to make adults laugh in front of strangers, it's very difficult. I would cut class in high school and wait online at Catch a Rising Star in New York City and stand in line for 7-8 hours just to get that one little audition ticket to go on stage at the Improv and at Catch a Rising Star in the 70s. So the 80s was the boom, but the prequel was actually the 70s.
Absolutely. Everybody, what I say is everybody cut their teeth and got their skills together so that when the 80s and television kicked in, they were ready.
There weren't many comedy clubs per se that were around the country. You really had to go. See, I can only tell New York. There was a guy called Richard M. Dixon out on Long Island. He was Richard Nixon's lookalike, and you can look him up. He was a lookalike for Richard Nixon. So and his career had waned after Nixon left office, right? He was big when Nixon was in office. He looked exactly like Nixon. He was an actor. He happened to look like Nixon. So he took his money and he opened up a club that was an equivalent to Catch a Rising Star in New York on Long Island, Massapequa, called the White House Inn. And that's where Long Island comics went to cut their teeth. It was like the Improv. It was like Catch a Rising Star. It was for singers and comics, mostly comics. And, you're 17, 18 years old. Rosie O'Donnell was there. Rosie O'Donnell. And as I said, people like Richie Minervini, Bob Nelson, very funny comic. A lot of good comics came out of Long Island. And Eddie was the biggest. Eddie, I met at another club called, which Richie Minervini opened up, called Eastside Comedy Club. And there was Eddie Murphy. I think he was 18 years old. He goes, yeah, I'm going to try this comedy thing for a while. Silver Friedman likes me at the Improv. And that was the beginning of the comedy boom on Long Island.
So every once in a while, I ask people who have an insight to certain comedians that I never got an insight on before. Did you know Eddie? Could you talk about him?
No, I didn't know Eddie because I was already traveling on the road.
Yeah, right. That's way before you.
Yeah, I knew Bobby Collins. I don't know if you know Bobby Collins.
Yeah, he's done the show.
Yeah, Bobby was a salesman for like Calvin Klein. He was a little older. And it was interesting. I was with comics that were older than me that had careers. I mean, they had businesses. They were doing something else. He was a grown man. I was a kid in college. Bobby was a man out in the real world, and he very charming, very funny. Always had that something special about him. He's still funny today, and he cut his comedic bones at the White House Inn, as we all did. Rob Bartlett, very funny comic, was there. Rob Bartlett and another comedian and Eddie were in a comedy group called the Identical Triplets. Very funny. Yeah, you should have asked Bobby Collins about that.
Yeah, never heard that before.
Yeah, he was in a comedy troupe called the Identical Triplets, and then Eddie became the rest is history. With Eddie, but I did not know him. Other comics, yes. Now, during that time, Jerry Seinfeld was already big in the early 80s. He had done the Tonight Show, and every comic in New York City at Catch a Rising Star, at the comic strip Improv, they all wanted to be Jerry. So you had all these comics that were monologists. They all happened to sound like Jerry. Let me tell you what happened to me today. I used to say to this one comic, I'm looking at him, I go, does he know he's doing Jerry? That's what you did, because growing up, our idols were Woody Allen, Robert Klein, George Carlin. They were our idols. But Eddie was from the generation that hit when he went out to LA and he did the Tonight Show. So this one comic actually sounded like Jerry. And I said, does anyone want to tell him he's doing Jerry? But it takes a while for a comic to find his own voice, what makes him unique, what makes him funny, what makes him stand out, his vision of the world.
And I would see what you saw. I would see these guys that sort of sounded like Paul Reiser, and they sounded like Jerry until either they got smart or they fell down.
Well, Richard Lewis thought Paul Reiser was doing his act or his persona because they were two funny Jewish guys from New York, and there was an issue between those two. Oh, and the reason why is Reiser looked up to Richard Lewis. You understand? When you study someone who's before you and you just love his style, maybe it came out with Paul. I don't know, but I thought they were different. But everyone is very, very, your persona, your jokes, your material it's your child. It's your way of earning living. So people are very, protective of their material or the persona, other comics from other comics. A little backstabbing, I would say, as you know.
One of the things I learned from the comedians was Richard Lewis been around a long time, a lot longer than people know.
And who helped him? David Brenner. Brenner took him under his wing. Brenner was older. Brenner was a guy, as you know, David Brenner, may he rest in peace, was older. He looked younger than everyone, but he came from another career. He was a documentary filmmaker, and he always wanted to be comedy. So he had a successful career doing other things, and he got to comedy later in life. But if you read stories about Richard Lewis was taken under David Brenner's wing early in the career, if you can believe that.
So one of the things I learned, and it's really the truth in almost any industry, whether it's comedy or business, is if you can behold yourself to someone who can help you, if someone can like you and you can like someone, that's going to help a lot.
It's not who you know, it's who you know could help you. Absolutely. Yeah. That's it's nice to have someone who champions you and helps you along the way. It does. And the comedy world's a little cliquish. Friends help friends. And if you don't, it's an arduous journey, as they say, doing it on your own. No one got anywhere without someone giving them a break. Basically,
yeah.
It's you can come up the hard way, come up the easy way. I mean, but guys like Jerry who's hysterical, still one of the greatest craftsmen I've seen in his specials. He did it his way. He earned it. He was funny. He got discovered, and he deserves any of those comics that made it. Paul Reiser, they deserved it, but he got a break. Paul Reiser. Paul kind of hit at the beginning of the comedy boom, and boom, he was in Diner, and the rest is history. It happens either, immediately, or there's a longer journey on the road, as you probably know.
And, after doing, 40 of these interviews, I'm learning a lot about just what you just said. It happens. Some people have to wait 15 years, and 10 years is almost like nothing. And the amazing thing about this show is hearing everybody's story and how different, and then sometimes how similar they are. For instance, a middleman would talk about the guys he stood on line with at the Improv. And you mentioned a line. Who did you stand on line with that were all struggling and really not going anywhere too fast at first?
All right. The standing in the line was back in 76. I'll give you an example of someone who I remember. Bruce Gold. Now, I don't know if you know Bruce Gold. These guys are like 10 years older than me. So Bruce Gold was, I used to take a comedy class with a comedian named Bruce Gold, was someone who was teaching comedy in 75. I was 17. He was 27. He's like a big brother, and he lived up where I went to college. So we were still friendly over the years. You know who stood online with me? Jeff DeHart. Does that name ring a bell?
No, it doesn't.
Look up comedian impressionist Jeff DeHart. Jeff was older than me. Jeff came back from Vietnam. He came back from Vietnam. These guys had to do something.
Wow.
And he was a great impressionist. Look him up. Get him on your show. He does that. Does right here. Does that Sullivan. He does all the old 80s goldies, but look him up. But these were guys that I remember. Kelly Rogers, who was a Catch a Rising Star. Who was coming. Now, can't remember the people online because we're going back 40 years, but I can tell you who the big acts during that time at Catch a Rising Star. And then, of course, the comic strip. But the big names at Catch was Kelly Rogers was the MC. David Say, funny comic, did Tonight Show like 30 times. Elaine Boozler. I would get my number. I'm ready to go on stage. And then I'd be bumped because Elaine Boozler walked in. You know Elaine, of course.
Sure.
And she was like a budding star. There weren't that many female comedians. But the thing is, when you did these showcase clubs, you're always getting bumped. Robin Williams bumped me a few times. I once said to him years later, I go, why is it when I get a gig on a Saturday night at Catch a Rising Star, what are you, in a helicopter outside and you're descending from a rope ladder and you go, oh, here, I want to go on right before Peter Fogel. And I would get bumped and I would no one wanted to go on after Robin Williams. Trust me. You know who went on after Robin Williams in the 80s at Catch a Rising Star and didn't even blink, didn't care? Jerry Seinfeld. Robin Williams destroyed the room. Jerry goes up on stage, looks out at the audience. I mean, you just had a comedic tornado on stage, right? And Jerry's different energy, correct? He looks out of the audience. He goes, piece of cake. And he went and he didn't care. He was that confident, Jerry. Piece of cake, and went on.
A lot of the comedians, it's interesting that we're talking about this because a lot of the comedians would say they would look at a Robin like their warm-up act because by the time they got on stage, everybody was laughing and even was laugh some more.
Yeah. If you had the goods, you could follow him. But if you're a starting comic,
no,
you don't want to follow him. It's tough. I mean, because they're comparing you. They're always comparing you to the last guy. I mean, it's Robin Williams. I mean, it's a force of nature, and you don't want them laughed out. I mean, I've seen Larry David trash rooms back then.
Oh yeah,
Larry again. He's someone I wish I was friends with. Larry I don't know if anyone brought up Larry. He wasn't the most. He was a comics comic. Comics would come in and watch Larry, but they'd watch him bomb,
Yeah.
and then he crashed the room. I don't know if they told you that.
Yes.
Then you have to go on after him. He'd like ruin the whole aura of the night and go, oh, I got to follow Larry, because Larry go, that's right, leave. If people would get up and leave during Larry, go, that's right, leave. I don't need you. Who needs you? He would trash the room. Is that what other comics were telling you?
Yes, whatever worked in Curb doesn't necessarily work in stand-up.
Yes, apparently, but it seemed to work for him.
And Howard Allen, you remember Howard? Howard was,
yes, I know Howard Allen. How is Howard Allen? Is he?
He's good. He's fine.
I know Howard Allen was very much. He was a acquired taste. Howard.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. What a name, man. That's going back to L.A. He wasn't in New York.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Howard Allen, man. What a blast from the past. That was like, wow. That was a slap in the face. Yeah, Howard. You really want to learn about comedy in the 80s, the Improv. You find someone who was an MC there, who saw it all, and you were there. I'm sure you were there. You saw all the comics. Bud Friedman.
So Bud walking around. Assign Howard the job,
right,
of making sure that Larry didn't throw the mic down and break it.
Yes. So Larry was trash. It was interesting. Larry was hired to do Fridays, which was the Fridays, the equivalent to Saturday Night Live. But I guess back even in the 80s and Larry at the Improv, because I was still in New York from 80 to 86. Then I went out to LA, 86 to 88. Then came back in 1990, where I won the Johnny Walker Red Comedy Search in New York.
Wow.
Did you remember that? Do you remember that?
No.
300 comics auditioned for the Johnny Walker Red Comedy Search. It was done all around the country. They were looking for a comedic winner. And I went down to Caroline's at the Seaport. This is 1989. I had food poisoning and I was feeling sick. And I went on in the afternoon. And we had Bob Morton from the Letterman Show. We had we had Barry Katz. Had Rick Newman was one of the judges. I'm the last comic to go on out of 300 comics, wannabe comics, seasoned comics, average comics. I was sick as a dog. I said, let me do this. I looked at the audience and out in the judges. This is like the movie They Shoot Horses, Don't They? I mean, it was a marathon. Can you imagine seeing 300 comics? Only 8 are picked later on to go for the semifinals for the contest.
Oof.
I looked out at the audience of the judges. It's Caroline's at the Seaport, if you know that club. I said, look, I'm finally headlining at Caroline's. I was the last comic on. I got chosen. I picked 4 out of the 8 comics that night. I had the set of my life that the other comics said, forget it. I can't beat him. I was just in the sweet spot for whatever reason. Comics did well. Rondell Sheridan, Paul Lyons, other comics. Once they saw me, they went, I was batting 4th. So the first 3 did pretty well, but I just knocked it out. And I won the contest. I was a semifinalist in the Johnny Walker Red Comedy Search 1990. Bud Friedman, who wasn't the biggest fan of mine when I was in LA earlier, he didn't ever champion me. I wasn't in his clique, to be honest. Bud had his favorites. Am I allowed to say that? I guess I am.
Sure.
And he gives me an oversized check like Ed McMahon giving clearinghouse sweepstakes. He whispers in my ear, he goes, I can't believe I'm giving you $1,000. It like bothered him. I can't believe I'm giving you $1,000. But I won the Johnny Walker Red Comedy Search. I went out to LA. I was in the finals. I think it was televised. I'm not sure. I had a very good set. I didn't win. Anthony Griffin won. But one of the judges was Paul Rodriguez. And after my set, I'm in the bathroom. He's one of the judges. We're in the bathroom taking a leak, and he's next to me. He goes, you're my favorite. I go, shouldn't you be out judging? Yeah, I'm taking a break. I went, okay. It was the weirdest thing. But I was, yes. So I could say, looking into the camera, I am an award-winning comedian. I was a semifinalist. I was the New York City regional winner of the Johnny Walker Red Comedy Search.
That's excellent, man. That's excellent.
Then I moved back to New York. I moved back to LA. I said, this is my inspiration. This is a sign from the gods. If only Bruce Starr could discover me. And of course, that didn't work out till later on as I get closer to Medicare. Thank you, Bruce Starr. Finally got to meet Bruce Starr.
So other than that, how did you do with agents and managers? Because, many times they can champion you Were you able to position yourself
Yes.
for them?
Don't forget, it was very, very big back then. Comedy, stand-up comedy. And people like, I was there the night Tim Allen auditioned for Michael Eisner. I was there in the audience. Michael Eisner, he's tall. He's like 6'5". I'm outside. I go, oh my God, that's Michael Eisner. I was hanging outside the Improv. He walked in with nobody around. I knew his managers. You know, I knew his managers at the time. And they walked in. Michael Eisner watched Tim Allen. Michael Eisner walked out. And the next day, Tim Allen had a series.
Home Improvement.
Home Improvement. And I had a good friend, Billy Reback, right on the show, consulting producer. But it was just like that. Like that. And then Ray Romano, who I grew up with, you know, came up in the ranks in New York City at Stand Up New York, Carrie Hoffman's club. I used to hang out with, you know, Ray, and he says to me, I go, what's the matter, Ray? He goes, nothing's happening with my career. You know, I got a job, I got a wife, kids. My manager, Rory Rosegarden, who I knew, a wonderful manager, says, be patient. You're my secret weapon. It's going to happen. And he was right. It did happen. Letterman saw Ray on the show. He got a break, and the rest is history. I was actually reviewed on a show by the New York Post. I'll send it to you if you want. With me, Tom McGillen, I believe, and Bill Sheft and I and Ray Romano were all reviewed on a stormy, rainy, miserable night in New York City by the New York Post. We all got reviews, and they said they called me the single man, because I did relationship material back then, being a single guy in New York City. And then the reviewer said what Peter Fogel is to single life, Ray Romano is to married life. And it was very interesting. We all had good sets, and the reviewer actually liked all of us. But she said, if I had to choose one comedian that was going to go on to stardom, I would say it'd be Ray Romano. Ray had that he had that X factor.
And you know, the same way that you mentioned Bobby Collins, you know, I don't know why he didn't become a huge household name, but he certainly had it. And Paul Reiser had it. You know, the Tim Allen, they had, you know, that. So the look along with the talent.
Reiser was interesting. Reiser came after Seinfeld. I love the fact they used to have the crossover shows because there were two guys roughly the same age in Manhattan dealing with the craziness of their lives, their show. You know, don't forget, Reiser, it was a mistake when he got Diner, you know. You understand that. It was a fluke. If it wasn't for Diner, we don't know who knows if Paul would have gone on to bigger. You never know, right?
Right.
Don't forget, Paul Reiser went with another actor who was auditioning for Diner, for Barry Levinson.
Right.
And somehow he signed himself in. He says, you should audition anyway. And he got it. It's just one of those things. You know, you got to understand, Paul Reiser hit like at 24 years old. He was in the comic strip. You know, he was 2 years older than me. So when I got to New York in 81, back to New York, leaving Chicago, Reiser had done Diner already. He was a New York City comic, Paul Reiser, and he got a break. It's about getting the break. You know, you can have all the talent in the world, but you need that break, that luck. Luck always wins out, right, Mr. Starr?
That's always. Absolutely. You know, one of the things, the message that I want to get across to the younger comedians is, and I hear it, I'm just learning all this stuff from these interviews, unbelievable interviews, is just show up. Be willing to show up. Even if they tell you there's no place for you, show up anyway, because someone may fall out and you just take their place. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard I was the last one seen, I was the one who wasn't supposed to be there, and they picked me.
It's you got to get up to bat. You got to get up to bat and do it. Reiser was a funny man, Jerry funny man. They're all Larry David, of course, Larry Miller, a couple of Larrys.
I love Larry. I almost was in a position for management for Larry, and he picked Rick Bernstein instead of me.
That'll show him. But look, I'm with you now.
That's right.
I win. And I would have returned your calls. I was with the Urban Author Agency when I got invited out.
I was in the 9200 Sunset Building with Howie Rapp.
You know what? And Howie Rapp's down here now, as you know.
Yep.
We're all we all have to eventually move to Florida. It's the law.
Howie's not talking to me.
Okay. You want me to be the, I'll get you guys back. No, I won't.
Because I'll tell you what happened.
What happened?
He I guess he hired me and paid me, some amount of money to work for him. And I did. I used to do the dailies. I would do the thing that would come out every day, and you send along people's pictures and you submit them. And I did that. I did not do it, but I also had my comedians at the time.
Yeah, that was your love.
I don't think he liked it that I was putting time into a business out of his office. I don't blame him. When you're in LA, you learn two things. You got to do what you got to do, within reason. And the other thing is sometimes you have to break some rules that other people make. Or else,
I don't understand. He didn't want you to get your comedians television or gigs on the road? He
didn't want me to my personal appearance stuff. I was doing my personal appearance agenting.
Yeah.
But for him, I was doing the TV and the commercials and the movie submissions.
Okay, that's what he wanted you to do.
Yeah.
Well, Howie's background was all personal appearance, so I don't understand why he was concerned about you doing that.
I guess I wasn't offering him my business. I was just doing that on the side while I was doing his business.
Okay, I see. So it was a conflict. All right. So he's not, to this day, 40 years later, he's not talking to you.
And, his partner down here, I've spoken to him, and then
Arnold,
and then he never got back to me. So I'm assuming 40 years later, people are still holding grudges.
Arnold loves everybody. Arnold's great. That's weird. Arnold is a mensch. Everybody loves Arnold.
So it was interesting to be at that 9200 Sunset building with Irvin Arthur was right next door. The door opened and there was Irvin.
I thought Rapp and Irvin shared the same office at times.
Yes, but there was a closed door.
Oh, okay. All right. Irvin was a really, Irvin's secretary was Joan Rivers in the beginning, in the 50s or the early. Did you know that?
No.
Well, now you know. Joan Rivers was Irvin.
Just missed her.
You missed her again. Yeah, she's a little older than us. So, but that's interesting.
So tell me about now, getting some paid gigs. I mean, you put your time in. Obviously, if you started in the middle 70s and now we're talking about the late 80s, what was it like to start having some successes?
Well, bars were used to having bands and the craziness of having rock bands. They realized comedy was getting big. They go, wait a minute, I can just have a stage with a microphone, don't have to deal with a band, them destroying stuff, paying them all this money, whatever, and dealing with the craziness. So we replaced bands in bars. So we did one-nighters all over New York State, Jersey, Pennsylvania. We all worked. I mean, they weren't paying much, but we were learning our craft. That's how we got better. The more you get in front of an audience, the funnier you are. You figure out what works, what doesn't work. You rewrite the material. Jerry wasn't much of a road guy. He did one-nighters in the area, but he mostly worked in New York City because Jerry Seinfeld, I'm promoting Jerry as if he needs my help. I'm just saying he was always looking how I can keep writing TV material, because the more, the Tonight Show, all the stand-up comedy shows that were coming up, it was giving comics exposure. Yet at the same time, we kept thinking, wow, all these stand-up comedy shows is going to take away from doing live performances. It only helped us. Don't forget, in the 60s, you could do the Ed Sullivan Show, and your money would go up exponentially. You could do it like once or twice a year. You're good for 3 years of having never to do the show again. You see what I'm saying? Jackie Mason's, all the big comics that we grew up watching as kids, the money they would get just for the exposure on the Ed Sullivan Show. So we were trying to parlay that in hey, you saw us on the Evening at the Improv, or the Tonight Show was the show that helped you get headliner money in comedy clubs that were springing up all around the country. Most comedy club owners were bar owners that just switched to comedy. That's what happened. We would play anywhere. And if you were on a sitcom or you're on the Tonight Show, that person would headline because people knew who they were and they were more of a draw. I was middle management. I was a middle act moving into headlining, getting funnier. But we did gigs all over the New York State area, the tri-state area, and we did it anywhere, Colorado, Boston, Kansas, wherever we went. We earned a living. And comics would rather go on the road and earn money because they had families, kids, whatever, than just staying in time, as you know, staying in town, hoping to be discovered by Bruce Starr.
Yeah, stop that. They had to
stop that. Why? What did I do? You were but you were getting them work on the road, correct?
Yeah, I was getting them work on the road. I had nothing to do with it's like my biggest star was Howie Mandel. I had absolutely nothing to do with his stardom at all. And I got lucky, and he said, yeah, sure.
Howie lucked out. Howie was a Canadian guy, owned a carpet company, right? He came down to L.A. as a fluke, and he went on stage as a dare, correct? Someone dared him, and he went on at the Comedy Store.
Comedy Store, and he killed.
Yeah. He killed. Didn't know what he was doing, but somehow he just killed. It was his first time. I actually did the audience warm-up on his, I filled in for somebody, for a friend who was the audience warm-up, and the germaphobe, Howie Mandel, actually shook my hand. I put that on my resume. He never shakes anybody's hand.
He must look clean.
Yeah, he must have looked clean, but he thanked me, but he actually shook my hand.
He's a sweetheart.
Very talented guy. He had that it. Right?
Absolutely.
He had the it.
It's that smile, that willingness to interact, and willingness to take chances. I mean, the two things that he did, I brought this up before on other shows. He did this thing with the surgical glove where he blew up the surgical glove. I don't even remember why. That's funny now, but he did it. And then he did something. I brought this up a few times. He loved doing this mime thing on stage, and he would take a handful of talcum powder, which is deadly now. People are realizing. He'd throw it on his face, it'd be totally white face, and he'd start doing mime.
That's funny.
It was funnier then than it sounds now. So, did you get a chance at all to, audition for sitcoms? Did you get in there at all?
Commercials, mostly voiceovers, commercials. Not as many sitcoms as I would have liked. I feel if I had gotten more opportunities, who knows what will happen. Again, if you don't have it all comes down to the representation, being seen. I mean, I did the CBS morning show with Bob Saget. I did a segment on there before he did Full House. I did all the Evening at the Improvs, Caroline's Comedy Hour, Comic Strip. I did all the HBO, Comedy Central shows. But again, I'm, as Chazz Palminteri, the actor director, says, you're like the poor man's Paul Reiser. I go, that's me. I'm the poor man's Paul Reiser.
So let's bring you up to modern day now. We have that poster behind you, and you did some great stuff. Let's talk about the last 10 years, actually.
10 years. I moved to Florida, as we all do, and there was a comic that had a show called My Mother's Italian, My Father's Jewish, and I'm in Therapy. It was off-Broadway. It was a big off-Broadway hit. Steve Solomon's My Mother's Italian, My Father's Jewish, and I'm in Therapy. He auditioned. He was looking for a national touring star, and he auditioned many actors on Broadway, and it's a very difficult show to do. You're doing an hour and 45-minute show with different voices, different characters, an old Jewish woman, and his father, and his mother, who's an Italian woman. He couldn't find anyone that could do the show with the different voices. He was letting go another actor who wasn't working out, and he had problems doing the characters. He needed someone that could, because Steve is a great dialectician. He has an 8-octave range. He can get very high and very low. So he's looking for an actor who can do voices, and someone recommended me, and I happen to live 3 miles from his house. And he goes, I heard about you. I've seen your show. Do you want to, I auditioned for him. He says, we're getting along now, but I'm going to ask you to do things with your voice that you may not be able to do, but you're going to have to do it. And but I would match every voice he wanted. And he goes, oh my God, you do exactly what I needed. And I got hired. I was at the right place at the right time. So for 8 years, I worked on the road as Steve Solomon Light with a producer that was full walling rooms. And I performed all around the country, from Texas to Seattle to Kansas City.
Wow.
All over. even in Long Island, and wherever Steve wasn't doing the show, the producer was doing the show. So I was, where most comics are on the road, doing cruise ships. I would do Solomon's show for a month. I was in Burbank, California, did 63 shows, 7 shows a week, sometimes 2 a day.
Wow.
It was very physically demanding. It's one thing to act with another actor, but when you're acting with yourself, it's very difficult. You got to pace yourself, stay healthy. People say, "What do you do on your day off?" I sleep and recharge my batteries.
So yeah, you bring up that thing about being on stage yourself, and so in this question, it's like, okay, it's a stand-up, a one-man show. I know I've never wanted to do this. People to this day say, "Oh, come on, you did stand-up." No, I didn't. I don't want to do it. I never did want to do it. I have no interest. It's not, my head space can't do anything like that. But how did you deal with feeling worthy about being the only person up on that stage pulling off that entire production?
It's it's like breathing. I mean, how do you ask a boxer, how do you get in the ring and take punches and hit? It's what you do. Don't forget, I was a 30-year veteran of stand-up comedy. So going to Steve's show was just another vehicle, and I had to act. I got to use my voices, my stand-up comedy, and my acting that I was trained at SUNY at Purchase. So I never got a bad review. I never got a bad review all raved reviews, and I will forward them to you even against your wishes. But I always got good reviews, and I took it. Hey, I get to use my stand-up, I get to use my voices, and I get to use my acting ability. So I would make the character alive, and it was fun. I mean, I felt blessed to be able to do that. You get to a point when you're a veteran, you've been doing this for 30 years, when you haven't done the show in a while and you have to go back to memorizing and going on, you get a little scared. But once, God, I've done over 800 performances. It's like breathing. I'm like a guy that can have a big meal and just go on stage and do it. I was that confident.
Wow.
You get into that you know what you're doing. Where every laugh is. Every nuance is. It's like anything. It's like being an athlete. Athletes know what they're doing. They've done it. They have muscle memory, and they do it. And I would just do it. When you've done 800 performances, it's in your DNA. Which brings me to my show that I created.
That's my question. My next question is, that gave you the confidence. How did that all start? And how did you move into your own?
I wanted to do my own show. I had originally co-written a show many years ago with someone that was a stage play. And I go, you know what? I'm going to rewrite this into a one-man show, revamp it, change the title, change everything. So I came up with a show called Till Death Do Us Part, You First. It's about a man in his late 50s who has a fear of commitment with women. And it was a combination of Defending the Caveman meets the John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. But it's my take on being a single guy, of trying to find the right woman. It's very difficult. I've been a single guy my whole life. It's very difficult being married with kids when you're a touring stand-up comic. It really is. And comics that I came up with and got married, had kids, a lot of them are divorced. It's not a conducive world. A woman wants a guy home. A woman does not want her husband or boyfriend, the wife, or as we call the defendant. No, I'm sorry, the plaintiff. The plaintiff does not, they want their husband home. They want a normal life. It's not easy, and I wrote a one-man show called Till Death Do Us Part, You First. It's about a man on Valentine's Day who's dumped by his girlfriend because he won't commit to her, marrying her. He had a fear of marriage, as I do. So it's very, just like Steve's show is very autobiographical about Italian Jewish guy growing up in Brooklyn with a multicultural background. My show is very semi-autobiographical. I'm taking all the stories of being single, my dysfunctional family, and made it into a one-man multimedia show that was eventually I did for many years till I was discovered by Chazz Palminteri, the creator of A Bronx Tale.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I was in Florida doing the show, and we had a mutual friend, and he says, I got a buddy of mine that wants to come to your show tonight. Can you just put tickets under my name and he'll show up? Who is it? I go, I'm not going to tell you. Just a friend. Can you do me a favor? Well, it happened to have been Academy Award nominee Chazz Palminteri of A Bronx Tale. He saw the show. I killed. I'm in the lobby selling my CDs and DVDs. This is what we do after solo shows. And we're talking. I go, oh my God, it's Chazz Palminteri. And he says, I loved your show. It has a lot of potential. And I go, that's surprisingly, I'm looking for a director to take it to the next level. And he says, I'll direct you. So he felt giving back to someone like me that he discovered, just like Robert De Niro discovered him with A Bronx Tale in '89 out in LA. And I remember seeing the show and I was like, oh my God, the Chazz Palminteri is going to direct my show. He created the most successful one-man show in the history of show business, as you know. Bronx Tale went on to become a movie, a musical, the solo show, of course. They're now doing a documentary. So I got the director. I was blessed to have the director, and he knows comedy. He thinks like a comic, but he's also a great director. And he just tightened my show. We wrote things together because he's a married man and I'm a single guy. So we're exploring the world of being a single man versus marriage. And it's a story where eventually I learned to let go and to finally commit to the woman of my dreams. Because comics, all we're doing is looking for love. That's what a comic is looking for on stage.
After the show, there's a lot more connection that we have that we can talk about.
Yes.
That you wouldn't know about me when it comes to the relationship things. But
yeah.
So Chazz, to this day, is still very much involved and hands-on with your project.
Yes, when I, we worked out a payment plan, and Chazz is part of the show. Like I said, he doesn't direct. I could honestly say I'm the only one-man show, I believe, a commercially written one-man solo comedy show being directed by a 3-time Emmy Award winner and Academy Award nominee actor, Chazz Palminteri. He's also a 3-time Emmy Award winner. So to me, that's my crowning achievement, that this man saw something in the show, my acting and my stand-up, and chose me. He doesn't direct many solo shows. Most people really can't afford to have him. He coaches actors. He directs. He still acts, of course. But you're not going to get him to direct a one-man show. So like Robert De Niro discovered him, he discovered me. So that was my chance.
Very nice. How can people find out more about now? I know you and I are going to be working together.
Hopefully, God willing.
Yeah, we will be working together. So, but how can people reach you to find out, what's going on with your production, and if they want to communicate with you?
My stand-up comedy website, of course, is fogelscorporatecomedy.com. But the show, Till Death Do Us Part, the website for that is Till Death Do Us Part, theplay.com. It's Till Death Do Us Part, theplay.com. You'll see reviews. You'll see some clips. You'll hear more about Chazz and me. And thankfully, when we do the show, Chazz helps with the marketing, of course, because he has a name and he has that cachet in the theater world. He's very big in the theater world, And don't forget, when the musical was done on Broadway, it was directed, co-directed with Jerry Sachs and Robert De Niro, 2 directors. Ooh. So, but Bob, it was very serendipitous with him and his show, and I felt it was serendipitous that I have the Chazz Palminteri chose me. I got a break.
You're a very talented guy. I've seen it from the videos that you sent me, and you have a definite place. You and I are not giving up. We're moving forward. There's still a lot left in us to make some big successes out there. And I have a feeling that you and I will be doing this together. I love the idea of your show, and we're going to be booking things like this around the country. And certainly, if we could come to an agreement with all the money that Chazz wants to make on this, we'll see what we can do.
This will be the post-pandemic solo show coming to a theater near you, because I've been doing. They're opening up in Florida, as you know, Bruce, and I've done some solo. I did my solo show in Jupiter with a socially distanced show, and they loved it. It was good to get back in. It's weird to not have done the show because of the pandemic. In fact, when I did the show in Boston, as I told you, on Valentine's Day, because it's a Valentine's Day themed show, I was the last live performing show at that theater. And the week after, what happened, COVID. So to get back the show, audiences want to laugh. They
Absolutely.
really want to laugh.
And I'm not waiting. I'm putting it out there. I'm going to get busy.
Yeah.
Getting lots of locations who are brave enough and intellectual enough to open up and want to bring entertainment back to a world that desperately needs it. I want to thank you so much for doing the show. You were a great guest.
It's my pleasure, Bruce. I wish you nothing but happiness and health, or health and happiness, and may this be my best year yet. No, that's wrong. May this be our best year yet.
It will be. It will be. And we'll be in touch. Thanks again. You're watching the 80s Golden Age of Comedy. Peter Fogel, great show. So much great information, insight into show business careers. We'll see everybody again. Bye-bye now.